My mom and I had this bond, one that was unbreakable in my eyes. We were a team. She was everything to me. My best friend, my guide, the one I could turn to no matter what. Growing up, it was always just the two of us. Sure, we had family, friends, and distant relatives, but it was me and her against the world. I think that's why when it all started to change, it hit me so hard. I had always believed that no matter what happened in life, no matter how tough things got, we'd face it together. We were a family, right? We were supposed to have each other's backs. I can still picture those mornings, the smell of pancakes filling the house, her voice calling me to hurry up, or the way we'd settle in for movie nights, snuggled up on the couch like nothing could go wrong. It was our little tradition. She'd always laugh at the dumbest jokes I'd make, even when she'd heard them 1,000 times before, and we'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. In those moments, I felt like we had something special, like nothing could tear us apart. I didn't know it then, but I was living in a bubble, one that would soon burst, and the reality would be harder to accept than I could ever have imagined. We had our routines. Every weekend, we'd go to the farmer's market or take little trips to the lake. It was the simple things that made us close, things I took for granted. I never doubted her love. I thought I knew everything about her. But then, as life does, things started to change. It wasn't like an overnight transformation, not at first. But slowly, I started to notice the little things. The way she'd look at her phone with a smile, then quickly hide it when I walked into the room. The late nights when she'd stay up, locked away in her room, tapping away on the keyboard. I didn't think much of it at first. People have hobbies, right? But it was the distance I started to feel that bugged me. It wasn't the same anymore. I would talk to her and it felt like she wasn't really there. Her mind was elsewhere, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't pull her back to me. Someone, was starting to take her away, and I had no clue who or what it was. I guess, in a way, looking back now, I should have seen the signs. But who would think that something as simple as a phone or computer screen could slowly tear apart the foundation of your life? Who could imagine that a mother would choose a stranger over her own flesh and blood? But that's the thing about life, right? It doesn't prepare you for these moments. We never expect the ones we love most to betray us. And before I even realized it, the world I thought I knew so well, our family, the bond I'd always believed would last forever, was beginning to unravel. It's strange how change can creep up on you, almost unnoticed, like a shadow you don't see until it's already stretched across everything you hold dear. At first, it wasn't anything dramatic. There were no shouting matches or slammed doors, no sudden arguments or accusations. It was just small things, tiny moments that individually seemed insignificant. But looking back, it's clear now. The seeds of what was to come had already been planted, and I was too blind to see them sprouting. Started with her phone. You know, those little things that seem so innocent at first, but then become the most glaring sign when you start to put the pieces together. She'd always had her phone on her, of course. I mean, who doesn't? But something changed. Suddenly, her phone became a thing of mystery. She'd glance at it with this small smile, just enough for me to notice but not enough to question. And the moment I walked into the room, her fingers would freeze, and she'd quickly look away, almost like she was hiding something. I could tell she was trying to keep whatever it was from me, but I didn't know why. After all, she was my mom, right? She never had secrets from me before. Then it wasn't just the phone. It was her behavior. The way she would get up earlier in the morning, disappear for hours into her room, and come out with this weirdly satisfied look on her face, like she was hiding something exciting or important. But whenever I asked her what she was doing, she'd just smile and say, "Oh, nothing. Just work." That response became more frequent as time went on, and I began to feel a little left out, I guess. Like I wasn't as important to her anymore. The little conversations we used to have, those simple check-ins where we'd laugh or share what happened during our day, started to feel like an obligation to her rather than something we both looked forward to. She'd give me short answers, distracted nods, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was subtle at first, but I could feel the distance growing between us. And the worst part? It wasn't just her physical absence, it was the emotional one, too. There were days when she was right there in the same room, but she might as well have been a million miles away. The spark we once had in our conversations, the emotional connection, was slipping away. It was like talking to a stranger, someone I didn't recognize anymore. Her voice had a new tone, distant, detached, and I found myself wondering if she was even hearing me. I'd share something about my day, and her response would be so hollow, so nonchalant, that I wondered if she was even listening. And yet, despite all of this, I couldn't put my finger on what was happening. I knew something was off, but I couldn't figure out what. It wasn't until later that I realized how much I had been ignoring, how much I had been willing to overlook just because I didn't want to face the reality that my mom, my best friend, the woman who had always been there, was slowly slipping away from me. I remember one night, I tried to talk to her. I casually asked if everything was okay, if there was something she needed to talk about. She laughed it off, told me everything was fine, and changed the subject. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I started to feel like an outsider in my own home, like she was keeping secrets from me, and no matter how hard I tried to reach her, the more she pulled away. It wasn't just the phone anymore. It wasn't just the long hours in her room. There was something else, something deeper, and I couldn't put my finger on it. But the distance was undeniable. And with each passing day, it got harder to ignore. I began to feel like I was living with a stranger, someone who didn't know me anymore, who didn't seem to care about the bond we'd once shared. The worst part? I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to break through the wall she was building around herself. I felt helpless. I felt powerless. I had no idea that the woman I had always turned to for comfort was now becoming someone I could no longer trust, someone I was slowly losing. I spent nights wondering if I had done something wrong. Maybe I hadn't been a good enough daughter. Maybe I wasn't living up to whatever expectations she had for me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't me. This wasn't about me. It was about something else, something that had nothing to do with our relationship. But what was it? The more I thought about it, the more it started to eat away at me. And the more I questioned, the further she seemed to retreat. Her distance grew, and so did the loneliness I began to feel. It wasn't just a physical distance anymore, it was emotional, too. The woman I once knew so well, the woman who had been my everything, was disappearing right in front of me. And I couldn't stop it. But I wasn't the only one who felt the change. No, I soon realized that the whole family felt it. I started hearing whispers, seeing the confused looks exchanged between family members. They could tell something was wrong, too, but no one knew how to address it. No one knew where the problem was coming from. Looking back, I can't help but feel like I should have known. Maybe if I had paid closer attention to the signs, maybe if I had trusted my gut a little sooner, I could have avoided the heartbreak that followed. But that's the thing about life, isn't it? It doesn't always give you a heads up before the worst things happen. You think everything's fine, and then, out of nowhere, your world comes crashing down. It was one of those days where I decided I'd had enough of the distance, enough of the strange behavior. I wanted answers, and I wasn't going to let her brush it off again. So, I took a deep breath, gathered all the courage I could muster, and confronted her. I demanded to know what was going on. I remember her reaction so clearly. Her eyes widened for a split second, and then she did that thing where she tried to laugh it off. "Oh, nothing's going on, honey," she said. "You're just being paranoid." But I wasn't convinced. Not this time. I could feel that something was off. And then, just like that, my heart dropped. My mind raced as I realized that the truth I'd been avoiding was right in front of me, staring me down. I don't know how it happened, but in the midst of our conversation, her phone buzzed on the table. For a split second, she hesitated before grabbing it, and I saw the name that flashed across the screen. James. A name I'd never heard before, and I saw the heart emoji beside it. That was enough to send a cold shiver down my spine. I didn't know who he was, but in that moment, I knew everything I needed to know. She'd been hiding something from me. She wasn't just withdrawing from the family for no reason. No, this James was the reason. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or just walk away, but I stood there, frozen, as the truth hit me like a freight train. My mom, my own mother, had been having an affair. Not a physical affair, but one that might as well have been. She had been investing time, energy, and emotions into someone online. Someone she'd never met face to face. A stranger. And she was choosing him. Over me. Over us. The heartbreak wasn't just in the betrayal itself, though. No, it was deeper than that. It was the realization that all the love I thought we had, all the years of me looking up to her, trusting her with everything, meant nothing compared to the feelings she'd developed for someone on the other side of a screen. I had spent so many years believing that no matter what, she would always be my number one. And in an instant, all of that was shattered. What made it worse was the guilt I felt. The guilt of not having noticed sooner. The guilt of not seeing how bad things were getting, how much she had pulled away, how she was prioritizing this man over the family. And the worst part? I felt utterly powerless. There was nothing I could do to change it. She had made her choice, and no matter how much I wanted to fight for her, for us, I knew she had already given up on that. I confronted her again, and this time, she didn't laugh it off. She didn't deny it. Instead, she just looked at me, almost sadly, and said, "I'm sorry you feel this way, but I'm in love with him." And just like that, the mother I had always known, the woman I thought would always be there for me, turned into a stranger. She had fallen for a man she met online, someone who had no real place in her life, someone who, in a way, had stolen her heart away from me. In that moment, I felt so small, so insignificant. I had no words. I couldn't even speak. I was drowning in confusion, betrayal, and disbelief. How could she do this? How could she replace me, her own daughter, for a man she had never even met in person? The emotional pain of that realization cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced. The truth was out, and I couldn't unsee it. There was no going back. My mother wasn't the same person anymore, and neither was I. I was left with this new, painful reality where nothing made sense. How do you come to terms with that kind of betrayal? How do you even start to understand why someone you love would choose someone else, especially someone they've never even met face to face? All I could do was stand there, holding my broken heart in my hands, watching as the woman who once meant everything to me walked further and further away. When I look back at that time, it's hard to fully capture the chaos that was going on inside me. One moment, I was standing there, processing what I had just discovered. My mother was leaving me for a man she met online, and the next, I felt like I was drowning. I didn't know what to feel first. Anger, hurt, sadness, or betrayal. All those emotions were tangled together in a way I couldn't even begin to untangle. I had always thought that no matter what, my mom would be there for me, that she would be my rock, my constant. But in an instant, she wasn't. She had chosen him, and I was left behind. The emotional pain I felt in those early days after the confrontation was something I wouldn't wish on anyone. I remember feeling like I had no place in the world. My mother, the one person who I thought would never let me down, had turned away from me, and I was left trying to pick up the shattered pieces of our relationship. I couldn't understand it. I still don't fully understand it. But the truth was undeniable. She was abandoning me. I could barely function. My mind kept replaying that conversation over and over again, and each time, it hurt just as much as the first. The guilt weighed heavy on me. Did I do something wrong? Was I not good enough for her? Was I the one who had failed? I thought that maybe if I had been a better daughter, a better person, things would have been different. Maybe if I had been more supportive or less demanding, she wouldn't have felt the need to turn to someone else. But deep down, I knew that it wasn't my fault. This wasn't about me. This was about her. This was about her need for something different, something she had found in this online affair. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. In fact, it made it worse. Because not only was I losing her to a stranger, but I was also losing the image I had of her. My mom had always been the one I could turn to, the one who understood me without words, the one who would always listen no matter what. Now, she was someone else entirely. I didn't know who she was anymore, and I didn't know how to deal with that. The loneliness I felt during those first few weeks was suffocating. I would sit in my room at night, staring at the walls, wondering how things had gone so wrong. I would text her, hoping for some sign that she still cared, but the responses were short and distant, just like everything else about her. It felt like she had checked out, mentally and emotionally, and I was left trying to salvage whatever I could from a relationship that no longer felt real. I tried reaching out to other family members, hoping for some kind of comfort, some kind of reassurance that I wasn't completely alone in this. But even they seemed distant. It was like they didn't know what to say, like they were afraid to confront the truth. Our family, which had always felt so solid, so connected, was now a broken home. The trust that once held us all together had been shattered, and it felt like no one knew how to fix it. My father, although supportive, was just as lost as I was. We were both left trying to navigate this new, painful reality, but neither of us had the answers. The bond between me and my mom had always been something I took for granted. It was never something I questioned, never something I thought could be broken. But now, I was left asking myself, what happened to us? The feeling of abandonment was overwhelming. It wasn't just that she had left for another man. It was the way she had distanced herself emotionally. She had been my mother, my confidant, the person who would comfort me when I was sad or frustrated. And now she was gone. The emotional pain I felt wasn't just from her leaving physically. It was from her pulling away emotionally in a way I could never have predicted. And to make matters worse, there was this constant, nagging feeling of isolation. It wasn't just that I had lost my mother. It was that I had no one to talk to who could truly understand. Sure, I had friends, but no one knew the depth of what I was feeling. How could they? How could anyone understand what it felt like to be abandoned by the one person you thought would always have your back? The betrayal cut so deep because it wasn't just about a mother leaving for another man. It was about her choosing someone who didn't even exist in the same world as us. Someone she had never even met face to face. It made me question everything I knew about love, about relationships, and about trust. What hurt the most was the realization that this wasn't just a phase. It wasn't something I could talk out with her, fix with time. This wasn't a small bump in the road that we could both get over. No, this was a full-on crisis. A family crisis that changed everything. The emotional fallout was something I had to deal with on my own. I couldn't go back and pretend things were fine anymore. The trust was gone, the bond was broken, and the family I had known was no longer the same. I couldn't just snap my fingers and make everything better. I had to face this loss head-on. I had to grieve. And that grief, it was like a weight on my chest. Some days I couldn't breathe through it. Other days, it felt like I was walking around in a fog, just going through the motions, pretending everything was okay, when inside, I was completely falling apart. In the days that followed my discovery, I couldn't shake the image of James from my mind. Who was he? What did he have that I didn't? It didn't make sense to me at first. How could a person, a mother, throw away everything we had? A lifetime of memories, our bond, our family, for someone she had met online. It didn't seem possible. But there he was, this stranger on the other side of the screen, someone who had somehow become the center of her world. And the more I thought about it, the more it consumed me. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer absurdity of it. She was replacing me, replacing us, for a man she had never met in person. Someone who could be anyone. A lie, a scam, or worse. And yet, she chose him over me. When I finally got the courage to ask her about him, to dig into the details, I learned that their relationship had blossomed over weeks, even months. It wasn't a fleeting thing. She had been talking to him, texting him, FaceTiming him, building a connection that had somehow eclipsed her relationship with me. And the worst part was that she didn't see anything wrong with it. She justified it to me in the same way someone might justify an affair. He understands me in ways you don't, she said, like it was supposed to make sense. He makes me feel things I haven't felt in years. And that hit me deep, because in that moment, I realized that it wasn't just about a man. It was about her, her unmet needs, and how she had chosen to look for comfort and validation from someone who was virtual. The whole concept of online relationships had always seemed like a foreign idea to me. Sure, I'd seen the headlines about people meeting online and falling in love, but those stories always felt distant, like something that happened to other people. But this was my mother. The woman who had raised me, who had taught me what love, trust, and family meant. And here she was, willingly stepping into the world of online dating, diving headfirst into a relationship with someone she barely knew, someone whose face I had never seen, someone who wasn't even real in the traditional sense. It shook me to my core. I found myself doing the one thing I never thought I would do. I stalked him. Couldn't help it. I needed to understand who this man was, what made him so special, why she was willing to risk everything for him. I scoured her social media accounts, trying to find any trace of him. I dug through old messages, trying to piece together their conversations, looking for clues about who he really was. I wanted to understand what had happened to my mom, the one who used to be so grounded, so present, so full of love. Where had she gone? What had happened to the woman who had always been so steadfast, so loyal? I found out more than I bargained for. He was a man in his mid-40s, just like my mom, but the similarities ended there. He had no family, no real career to speak of, and seemed to live in a constant state of isolation. Something that should have raised red flags, but didn't. They'd connected over shared interests, yes, but as I went deeper into their messages, I started to see the patterns. It wasn't just friendship. It wasn't just a casual connection. It was emotional manipulation, wrapped up in the form of sweet words and promises. He told her everything she wanted to hear. He made her feel like she was the only person who mattered. And in doing so, he pulled her away from the life she'd built with me, with our family. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how dangerous this whole thing was. How many people were falling for the illusion of online relationships without ever considering the long-term consequences. How many people were hiding behind their screens, pretending to be someone they weren't, convincing others to invest their emotions in something that wasn't real. My mom was caught in that trap, and I couldn't help but feel like I had been watching it all unfold helplessly, like I was watching her sink into quicksand while I stood by, unable to pull her out. And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I understood why she had turned to this online affair. I could see the cracks in our relationship, the emotional void that had been left when she stopped being present for me. The truth was, our family wasn't as perfect as I had once believed. There had been years of unmet emotional needs, years of tension that I had ignored, and I think she had just been looking for a way out. She had found it in the form of James, and in a twisted way, I understood that she had felt justified in her actions. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to swallow. It didn't take away the hurt, the feeling of being replaced. It didn't fix the broken trust between us. In the days that followed, I couldn't escape the questions that haunted me. Who was this man to her? Why him? Why now? And most importantly, why did he mean more to her than I did? How did someone become so entangled in an online relationship that they could overlook everything they had in the real world? I wish I could have understood it. I wish I could have understood her. And as I spiraled deeper into my confusion, I had to face the ugly truth that no matter how much I wanted to fight for her, no matter how much I wanted to be the one to help her see reason, I couldn't. She was already too far gone. The damage had been done, and I was left to deal with the fallout. She wasn't the same woman anymore. And in the end, I realized something. I wasn't the same person either. I spent weeks, maybe even months, trying to make sense of what had happened. How could my mother, the woman who had given birth to me, who had raised me with so much love and care, suddenly choose a man she met online over the family that was right in front of her? I don't think I'll ever fully understand it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about James. It wasn't just about some random man she had met in an online dating world. It was about something deeper, something I hadn't noticed, something I hadn't been willing to admit. When you're in the middle of something like this, it's almost impossible to see the bigger picture right away. All you can focus on is the hurt, the betrayal, the feelings of abandonment. It's hard to step back and see that maybe, just maybe, there were cracks in the relationship long before James came into the picture. But in those long, sleepless nights, I found myself asking questions I had never dared ask before. Had I missed something? Had my mom been unhappy for longer than I realized? Had I been so caught up in my own life that I failed to see the signs? I think I was too young, too naive to see the depth of the issues we were facing. Growing up, everything seemed perfect. But when you're so close to a situation, when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to see the little things that start to go wrong. It wasn't until my mother was deep in this online relationship that I began to understand the distance between us. It wasn't just the physical separation, her long hours on the computer, her emotional detachment. It was the fact that she had never truly communicated her feelings to me. The worst part was that I felt like an outsider in my own life. My mom had always been someone I could talk to, someone who understood me like no one else did. But now, I felt like I didn't even know her. The woman who used to sit with me and listen to my endless rants about my day was now looking for comfort in the arms of a stranger. I felt so small, so insignificant, and I couldn't understand why. What was it about him that made her turn her back on me? Was I not enough for her? It took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that it wasn't about me. She hadn't chosen him over me because of something I had done or hadn't done. She had chosen him because she was looking for something that she hadn't found in our relationship. Maybe it was excitement, maybe it was the thrill of something new, maybe it was just someone who made her feel seen and heard in ways she hadn't felt in years. But the truth was, she had made a choice, and I wasn't a part of that choice. And let me tell you, that realization stung. It hurt like nothing I had ever felt before. It wasn't just the betrayal of her leaving me for someone else. It was the realization that I had never been enough for her in certain ways. We all crave attention, love, and validation. But when you're a child, you think those things come from your parents automatically. They're supposed to be the ones who give you everything, right? So when she looked for that outside of me, it felt like a betrayal that cut to the core. The thing I had to come to terms with, though, was that her decision wasn't really about me at all. It was about her own emotional needs, her own desires. She was looking for something she felt was missing in her life, and it had nothing to do with me. I had to admit that, despite how much it hurt, this wasn't something I could control. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't make her see how wrong this was. And that's when the questions really started to hit me. Why him? Why someone who was so far removed from our reality? Was it the excitement of being swept off her feet by someone who made her feel special? Who made her feel like she was finally seen after years of feeling invisible? Was it the fact that James didn't have any baggage, any history with her? There was no past, no old arguments, no emotional weight. He was just this blank slate that she could mold however she wanted. And that, I think, was part of the draw. The illusion of perfection. The ability to be whoever she wanted to be, without the complications of real life. But here's the thing. As I began to process all of this, I started to see the cracks in the facade of their online relationship. It was all an illusion. He wasn't real in the way I had always understood relationships. Yes, they had real conversations, yes, they connected, but there was no physicality, no true emotional connection in the traditional sense. It was all just words, promises, and hope. And I began to see how fragile that connection really was. Was it real love? Or was it just an escape from her reality? From the family she had built, from the responsibilities of motherhood, from the reality of the life she had with me? But even as I asked myself these questions, I realized that I could never truly know the answers. I could never understand what drove her to make the decisions she did. All I could do was accept that her journey wasn't mine to control, and that I had to let go of the need to understand everything. Sometimes the people we love make choices that we can't wrap our heads around. Sometimes they seek fulfillment in places we can't follow. And all we can do is pick up the pieces of our own hearts and move forward. If there's one thing I learned through all this, it's that confronting the people we love, especially when they've hurt us, is never easy. It's messy, it's emotional, and it's full of things you don't want to hear but desperately need to say. And that conversation with my mom is one I'll never forget. It's the kind of conversation you hope never happens. But deep down, you know it's inevitable. The kind where you realize that the person you've spent your whole life with, the one you've always looked up to, is no longer the person you thought they were. I was terrified. What would I say? How could I even begin to express the depth of my pain without pushing her further away? There's a part of you that hopes the other person will somehow get it, that they'll see the hurt in your eyes and understand without you having to say a word. But reality isn't that easy. So, I gathered up all the strength I had, even though I felt like my world was crumbling beneath me, and I went to her. It was late one evening after a long day. I knew it was the right time to do it, even though I felt like I was about to explode. When I walked into her room, she was sitting on the edge of her bed, looking at her phone. It was him again. I could see the smile on her face, the way her eyes softened when she read whatever message had popped up on the screen. And that right there, seeing her react like that to someone who wasn't me, was the breaking point. "Mom, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaking. She didn't look up, but she did sigh, as if bracing herself for something unpleasant. She already knew what I was about to say. "I don't know what you want me to say," she responded quietly. "I told you, I'm happy. He makes me feel things I haven't felt in years." There it was again, the justification. The words that made my heart crack just a little more. I tried to hold back the tears. I really did. But it was too much. The pain was too raw, too fresh. "What about me?" I choked out. "What about us? Doesn't that matter to you? All these years, all this time we've spent together. Doesn't that mean anything anymore?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked away, like she couldn't face me. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her understand how deep the betrayal cut. But I knew that wasn't going to help. The truth was, I wasn't talking to the same woman anymore. The woman I once knew, the one who would have never hurt me like this, was no longer in front of me. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she finally said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "But this, what I have with him, it's something I need right now. I'm not saying it's permanent, but it's something that helps me feel alive again." And there it was, the brutal honesty. She wasn't justifying it for my sake. She was explaining it to herself, as if I was some bystander in her own personal crisis. She was seeking something that, to her, was more important than the years of love and care we'd shared. I stood there in shock, trying to absorb her words. The idea that she needed someone else to make her feel alive, that she couldn't find that in the family she had created, was something I couldn't wrap my head around. I thought back to all the sacrifices she'd made for me, all the things she'd done to make sure I was happy, safe, and loved. And now, here she was, telling me she needed someone else to feel whole. "I don't know what to say to you anymore," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know how to talk to you without feeling like you're not really here anymore." The words came out like they were being ripped from my chest. Felt like I was losing her all over again, piece by piece. She stood up then, walked over to me, and for a brief moment, I thought she might reach out, might try to comfort me. But instead, she just looked at me with a sadness in her eyes that I didn't know how to interpret. "I never wanted to hurt you, but sometimes we make choices that we can't take back." Those words, they stung. I wanted to scream that it wasn't a choice, that it was betrayal, pure and simple. But instead, I stood there, holding back tears, as the woman who had once been my entire world pulled even further away. "I don't know who you are anymore," I said quietly, the weight of those words settling on my shoulders. "I didn't know how to come back from this. I didn't know how to fix this." And maybe that was the hardest part. I wasn't sure if she wanted it fixed. We both stood in silence for a long moment. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to do. I walked away that night feeling like a part of me had died. The woman I had spent my life loving, the one I had trusted with everything, was no longer the person I thought she was. And I didn't know how to get that person back. In the weeks following that conversation, I felt like I was walking through a fog. My mind couldn't process what had happened. It was like living in a world where everything was muted, where everything had changed but nothing was really different. On the outside, life continued. People went to work, classes happened, friends still met up, but inside I was broken. My heart ached in ways I didn't think were possible. The hurt was like a weight I carried everywhere I went, a constant reminder of the betrayal I had experienced. And it wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was the emotional fallout, the emptiness left behind by someone who had been such an integral part of my life. It was a loss that felt impossible to reconcile. My mom's departure didn't just change our relationship. It changed everything. Our home was never the same. I remember walking into the living room one day, and it hit me. Her absence was felt everywhere. The space where we used to sit together, The place where we had shared so many meals and talks now felt empty. Every corner, every room seemed hollow. I couldn't escape the feeling that the home we had built together was no longer the home I knew. It wasn't just the physical space that had changed, it was the emotional one, too. The bond one had always felt between us. The deep connection that made our home feel safe was gone. Her departure also affected the way I interacted with the rest of the family. I could see it in my father's eyes, the hurt, the confusion, the sorrow that mirrored my own. We never talked about it openly, though. Neither of us really knew how. How do you process something like this? How do you talk about the woman who left without looking back? Who replaced us with a stranger she'd never even met? My father and I tried to go on with life as if everything was normal, but it was impossible. Our family was broken, and there was no pretending it wasn't. At family gatherings, I could feel the awkwardness, the silence where there should have been laughter, the forced conversations where no one knew quite how to fill the empty spaces. Relatives would ask about my mom, and I would have to lie, saying things like, "She's doing fine, just busy with work," when I knew it wasn't true. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone the real reason she was gone. I didn't even know how to explain it myself, let alone to the people who still didn't understand the gravity of what had happened. But the real challenge came when I realized that the pain of her absence wasn't just emotional. It was all-consuming. It affected my ability to trust. Trust in people, in relationships, in the very idea of love. How could I trust anyone after what my mom had done? How could I open myself up to someone, knowing that at any moment, they could walk away without warning, just like she had? I found myself pushing people away, unwilling to let anyone get too close. I couldn't bear the thought of someone leaving me like that, of being left behind yet again. My relationships with my friends also suffered. I tried to hold it together, tried to pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. But how do you pretend that everything's okay when your world has been turned upside down? I would go out with them, smile, laugh, and joke, but it all felt like a facade. I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that I was carrying around this huge weight, this burden that no one else could see. I didn't know how to share it with anyone. How could I explain to my friends that I felt like I had lost my entire world? That my mom, the woman I had always trusted above all else, had turned her back on me? And the emotional toll, it was exhausting. It wasn't just the sadness, the anger, the betrayal. It was the constant mental fatigue of having to fight against those feelings every single day. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, when my mind wouldn't stop spinning, replaying everything over and over again. I kept asking myself the same questions. Why did she leave? What did I do wrong? How could I have prevented this? But no matter how many times I asked, the answers didn't change. The hurt didn't go away. It just lingered. And the worst part was that I didn't know how to move on from it. The thing about betrayal is that it leaves a scar. One that's not always visible, but it's there, deep down. And the worst part of that scar is that it keeps reminding you of what you lost, of what could have been. And you can't forget it. Even if you try to push it down, to ignore it, the pain resurfaces when you least expect it. And that's what made it so hard to heal. Every time I thought I was moving forward, every time I thought I was starting to feel like myself again, the grief and the anger would rear their ugly heads. I couldn't talk to my mom. I couldn't reach her. She had already made her decision. But I was left to deal with the aftermath, left to rebuild my life on my own, without the one person who I thought I could always count on. It was a journey of self-discovery, yes, but it was also a painful one. I had to come to terms with the fact that my mom might never come back, that she might never be the person I once knew again. And in some ways, that was harder to accept than the betrayal itself. And then, in the midst of all the pain and the chaos, I realized something important. I had to let go. I had to let go of the idea of her, the idea of the mother I thought I had. I had to accept that she had made a choice, and that choice wasn't about me. And that realization, as painful as it was the first step in moving forward. Grief doesn't always look the way we think it will. When I first found out about my mom's online affair and the emotional distance that grew between us, I thought grief was going to be this huge, overwhelming wave that would knock me off my feet. But in reality, it wasn't like that at all. Grief came in waves, sure, But sometimes it was subtle, almost sneaky. Sometimes it showed up when I least expected it, like when I'd pass by her old room or see her favorite mug in the kitchen. Other times, it would hit me hard and fast, with tears I couldn't stop, or a pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. But through it all, I had to learn how to cope. And that process wasn't easy. The first stage of grief for me was anger. I was angry with her. I was angry with James. I was angry with the world for allowing this to happen. I'd yell at the walls, scream into my pillow at night, and feel this simmering rage bubble up whenever I thought about her. How could she do this to me? To us? It didn't seem fair. I wanted to lash out, to tell her everything I felt, to make her understand the damage she had done. But I quickly realized that anger wasn't helping me heal. It was just consuming me. It made me feel out of control, and that wasn't what I needed. What I needed was to figure out how to move forward, how to process this pain without letting it define who I was becoming. The second stage of grief was denial. There were days when I couldn't accept that she was gone, emotionally and mentally. It was easier to pretend she was still the person I knew, to cling to the memories of the mother I thought I had. I'd tell myself that she was just going through a phase, that she'd come back to us, that this was temporary. I didn't want to accept that this was the new reality, the one where she had made a choice that left me behind. Denial was my way of holding on to hope, but eventually, I realized I had to let that go. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. Then came sadness. This was the hardest part. I couldn't understand why it hurt so much, but it did. It was as if a huge chunk of my identity had been ripped away. I had to grieve not just the loss of my mom, but the loss of the family I had known. I had to grieve the ideal of what I thought my life would look like, the future I had imagined for us. And with that sadness came a deep sense of loneliness. I realized that no matter how many people surrounded me, no one could truly understand what I was going through. My friends tried to help, but they couldn't fill the void left by my mom's absence. And that was something I had to learn to sit with. But even though the sadness was overwhelming at times, I also knew that it wasn't going to last forever. I knew that healing wasn't something that could happen overnight. It was going to take time, and that was okay. I learned to give myself permission to grieve, to feel the emotions that came up, without judgment. And slowly but surely I started to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I was back at square one, and days when I thought I was making progress. But through it all, I reminded myself that grief was a process, a long and difficult one, but one that I had to work through to heal. In the midst of the grief, I began to realize something powerful. I didn't need to hold onto the anger, the guilt, or the sadness forever. I could choose to let go of the things that were holding me back. I could choose to stop letting my mom's actions define me, and instead, focus on who I wanted to become. That's when I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It wasn't a sudden shift, but a gradual one. I started to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about learning to live with it and moving forward with a sense of strength. If there's one thing I can say with certainty after all of this, it's that betrayal changes you. It doesn't just affect your relationship with the person who hurt you, it affects your relationships with everyone. It takes a long time to realize just how deeply an experience like this ripples through every part of your life. I didn't expect it, but the scars my mom's departure left on me became wounds that affected my ability to trust, love, and connect with others. I found myself questioning every relationship I had. Romantic, platonic, and even familial. The first area that took a hit was my ability to trust. After what my mom did, how could I trust anyone again? How could I allow myself to believe that someone would choose me, stay by my side, and care for me when she hadn't? Trust was shattered, not just in her, but in myself. I found myself doubting my own judgment, second-guessing every decision, wondering if I could truly ever let someone into my life the way I had once let her in. The idea of opening up to anyone else felt like an invitation for them to hurt me the same way my mom had. And no one wants to go through that again. Romantic relationships, in particular, became complicated. I was afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of being hurt. I kept people at arm's length, always pushing them away before they could get too close. I didn't want anyone to see the real me, the broken, betrayed version of myself that I didn't even know how to fix. I kept my guard up so high that no one could get through, even if they wanted to. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I convinced myself I didn't need anyone. I was fine on my own. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I longed for connection, for someone who would see past my walls and still love me for who I was. But I wasn't ready to let anyone in. Not yet. Even my friendships started to feel strained. It wasn't because I didn't value my friends. It was because I was afraid they'd leave me too. I kept expecting people to abandon me, to betray me the way my mom had. It was as if the foundation of trust had been cracked beyond repair, and every relationship I had was built on a shaky ground that could collapse at any moment. I found myself withdrawing from the people who cared about me, not because I didn't appreciate them, but because I didn't know how to trust them anymore. The fear of being abandoned again kept me isolated, even from the people who loved me unconditionally. But it wasn't just about trust, it was also about intimacy. The emotional walls I had built didn't just protect me. They kept me from being truly close to anyone. I realized that the way I viewed love had shifted. What my mom had done, choosing someone else over us, made me question what it really meant to love someone. How could I trust someone enough to let them love me if they could so easily turn away? And how could I love someone fully without being afraid of losing them? I also started to wonder if I was capable of having healthy relationships anymore. If my mom could betray me so completely, was I doomed to repeat the same patterns in my own relationships? Would I ever be able to trust someone again? Would I ever be able to build something lasting and genuine? These were questions I had to confront as I navigated the aftermath of her actions. I realized that my mom's betrayal wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of what I thought love was. But slowly, over time, I began to see that not all relationships are like that. Not all people will abandon you when things get tough. Not everyone will choose someone else over you. I began to learn that love doesn't have to be perfect, and that trust doesn't have to be broken forever. I wasn't doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past, but I had to do the hard work of rebuilding my own trust in myself and others. I had to take the time to heal, to learn that love, real, unconditional love, was still possible. And while it wasn't easy, it was a journey I had to take. I had to remind myself that not everyone would betray me, that I could trust again, and that I deserved love that was real and true. But it took time, took patience, and it took me learning to love myself first, something I hadn't really done before. Because once I could love and trust myself, I realized I could open my heart to others again. Healing is a process, and one that's often far messier than we expect. After everything that happened with my mom, I thought that all I needed to do was confront the truth, accept it, and move on. But life doesn't work like that. You don't just wake up one day, snap your fingers, and feel better. Healing takes time, and it's not linear. There are good days, bad days, and days when you feel like you're back at square one. And honestly, that's okay. The first step for me was allowing myself to grieve. I had spent so much time running away from my feelings, pushing them down, trying to pretend everything was fine, but I realized I couldn't keep doing that. Grief is messy, and it doesn't fit neatly into a box. Sometimes, it hits you when you least expect it, like when you see something that reminds you of your mom, or when a song comes on that you used to listen to together. Those moments still sting, but I learned that it's okay to let the pain surface. Trying to suppress it only prolonged the process of healing. I also started focusing on self-care. This wasn't just about bubble baths or taking a day off work. It was about taking care of my mental and emotional well-being. It meant getting honest with myself about the things I needed to let go of, the anger I had to release, and the forgiveness I needed to give, not just to my mom but to myself too. I had to forgive myself for thinking I had done something wrong, for believing that I wasn't enough. I had to accept that her actions weren't a reflection of my worth. One of the most important things I did during my healing was creating space for myself. For so long, I had defined myself by my relationship with my mom. I was her daughter, and that was a huge part of who I was. But when that bond was broken, I felt lost. I didn't know who I was without her. So, I took time to rediscover myself, what I liked, what I didn't like, who I wanted to be, and where I wanted to go in life. I took up hobbies I'd put aside, spent time with friends who lifted me up, and even traveled to new places to broaden my perspective. The more I focused on finding joy in other parts of my life, the less the grief consumed me. But it wasn't just about the big things. I also learned to take things one day at a time. There were days when I didn't feel like getting out of bed, when the weight of everything was just too much to bear. On those days, I let myself rest. I didn't push through with the idea that I had to be strong all the time. It was okay to take a break, to allow myself to feel tired and broken. I started to redefine strength, not as a constant state of being okay, but as the ability to keep going even when things aren't perfect. I also leaned on therapy. I don't think I could have healed without it. Having someone to talk to who wasn't emotionally involved in the situation was crucial. Therapy helped me unpack my emotions, process my feelings, and gain a new perspective on everything. I learned tools for managing my anxiety, my grief, and my anger. It gave me a space to express myself without judgment, and it helped me understand that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning to live with it, finding peace with it, and using it as a source of strength. Over time, I started to see the changes in myself. The weight that had once felt unbearable began to lighten. I started to feel like I could breathe again, like I could exist without constantly being reminded of the pain. I learned to trust myself again. And most importantly, I learned that I didn't need to be defined by my mom's actions. Her choices didn't have to dictate my happiness or my future. I could choose to be happy, regardless of what she had done. Healing is never easy, and it's never quick. But I've learned that it's possible. It takes time, patience, and a willingness to face your pain head-on. It takes a commitment to yourself, to your well-being and your emotional recovery. It means understanding that you don't have to do it alone, and that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. And through all of that, you come out the other side not necessarily healed in the traditional sense, but stronger, wiser, and more resilient than you were before. When everything changed with my mom, I felt like I was losing my sense of reality. It's not every day you find out that the person you trusted the most has chosen someone else over you, especially when that someone is someone they met online. At first, I didn't know how to cope. I didn't know how to understand why this was happening to me, to us. It felt like my entire worldview had been flipped upside down, and I was left trying to put the pieces back together. But as time passed, and I moved through the pain, something began to shift. Slowly, I started to see the lessons hidden within the heartbreak, the wisdom that was buried deep in the ashes of what was lost. One of the first things I realized was how much I had depended on my mom for validation. I had relied on her for emotional support, for guidance, and for love. But when that was taken away, I was forced to confront a harsh truth. I had to learn to validate myself. It wasn't easy. For so long, I had been seeking approval from others, particularly from my mom, who I thought was the one person whose opinion mattered above all else. But in the end, it became clear that my sense of self-worth had to come from within. I couldn't rely on anyone else to make me feel valuable. I had to recognize my own worth, my own strength. And once I started doing that, I began to heal. Another major lesson I learned was the importance of boundaries. Before everything with my mom unfolded, I had been the kind of person who never questioned anything. I assumed that my mom would always be there, that we would always have each other. But now, I understand the need for healthy boundaries in every relationship, even with the people we love most. It's important to protect yourself from emotional harm, to ensure that you're not allowing someone to disrespect you or take you for granted. I had learned the hard way that love doesn't mean tolerating disrespect or accepting behavior that hurts you. Setting boundaries isn't about pushing people away. It's about protecting your emotional well-being and ensuring that you are valued and respected. The most profound shift, though, came in how I viewed relationships in general. I had always believed that love was supposed to be unconditional, that no matter what happened, you stuck by the people you loved. But this experience showed me that love is also about mutual respect and trust. My mom's actions weren't just about a romantic fling or an online affair. They were about the breakdown of trust, and that was something I couldn't ignore. I learned that trust is the foundation of any meaningful relationship. Without it, there's nothing left to build on. And while I still believe in love, I now know that it has to be built on respect, honesty, and mutual care. You can't force someone to love you, and you can't expect someone to stay if they aren't willing to commit to the relationship fully. Perhaps the most unexpected lesson I learned was about forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing someone's behavior or pretending like nothing happened. It's not about absolving the person who hurt you of responsibility. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the anger and bitterness that can consume you. It's about letting go of the desire for revenge and finding peace within yourself. It's a long and difficult process, but I realized that holding on to anger only kept me trapped in the past. Forgiving my mom, even if she never fully understood the impact of her actions, allowed me to let go of the weight that had been dragging me down. It didn't mean I forgot what happened, but it meant I was no longer allowing it to control my life. And while all of this was happening, I began to rediscover what truly matters to me. I started to focus on my own growth and development, on the things that made me feel alive and fulfilled, apart from my relationship with my mom. I spent time doing things that brought me joy, traveling, reading, and working on my personal goals. I began to see that there was life beyond the pain and the heartbreak, and that I was capable of rebuilding, of creating a new reality for myself. My happiness no longer depended on someone else's actions or choices. It was something I could create on my own. In the end, I realized that the experience, as painful and heartbreaking as it was, taught me how to be resilient. It taught me how to rebuild my life from the ground up, how to trust myself again, and how to move forward with strength and courage. I may not have chosen this path, but it was the one that I was given, and I made the choice to learn from it. The old reality of who I thought my mom was, of who I thought we were, no longer existed. But that didn't mean my life was over. It just meant I had to create a new reality, one where I was in control of my own happiness, my own peace, and my own future. As I sit here reflecting on everything that has happened, it's clear to me now that moving forward isn't about forgetting the past. It's about using the lessons from that pain to fuel your journey ahead. There's no perfect roadmap for healing, no simple step 1, step 2, step 3 that guarantees everything will get better. But what I've learned through all of this is that, even when life throws you the hardest blows, it's possible to rise again. It's possible to reclaim your peace and your strength. I won't pretend like I'm completely healed. There are days when I still feel the weight of the loss, the sadness of being betrayed by someone I loved so much. But I've come to realize that it's okay to feel those emotions. It's okay to acknowledge the hurt, the anger, and the confusion, because those are all part of the healing process. And with each passing day, I'm learning how to release the things that no longer serve me. Whether it's the anger, the disappointment, or the fear that I'll be hurt again. One of the biggest shifts I've experienced is the realization that healing comes from within. It's not about waiting for someone else to make things right or expecting other people to fix your broken pieces. It's about recognizing that you have the power to rebuild your life, your happiness, and your future. You don't need anyone else to validate your worth. You don't need someone else's love to feel complete. You are already whole. And that's what I want to leave you with: hope. No matter what you've gone through, no matter how deep the betrayal or the heartbreak, there is always a way forward. You may not know exactly how things will unfold, but you can choose to move forward with strength. You can choose to heal. You can choose to create a future that reflects the lessons you've learned and the person you're becoming. For anyone who's struggling with a similar situation, know that you're not alone. It might feel isolating at times, like the pain is too much to bear, but there are people out there who have been where you are, and they have found a way to move forward. It's a difficult path, but it's a path worth walking. So, if you're feeling stuck, remember this: you have the power to rise above the pain. You have the strength to move forward, and you have the courage to keep going, even when it feels like the road is too long. Keep going, keep growing, and most importantly, keep believing that your story isn't finished yet. You are more than the betrayal you've experienced. You are stronger than you think, and with time you'll find your way back to peace, to joy, and to the life you deserve. So, if you've been following along, I hope you've seen that healing isn't a linear path. It's messy, it's complicated, and at times it feels impossible. But I want you to know that, just like me, you have the strength to get through whatever it is that's holding you back. It may not be easy, but with time and effort, You'll find a way to rebuild your trust, your happiness, and your sense of self. You are more than the pain you've gone through, and more than the people who have hurt you. Don't let their choices define your worth. Take this moment to reflect on what you've learned from your struggles, and ask yourself, what kind of person do you want to be moving forward? What kind of life do you want to build? If you're struggling with letting go or rebuilding, remember that it's okay to take small steps. Every day is a new opportunity to choose healing over hurt, hope over despair, and peace over anger. It might not feel like it right now, but you will get there. And when you do, you'll look back and realize just how much stronger you've become. I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a betrayal like this? How did you cope? And what did you learn from it? Leave a comment below, and let's support each other through our journeys. And if you're ready to take the next step toward healing, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notifications so we can keep this conversation going. Remember, your story isn't over yet. You have the power to write the next chapter, and it's going to be amazing. Keep going, keep growing, and keep believing in yourself.